Hello and welcome everyone. Today is Friday, June 23rd, 2023, and this is a special meeting of the Litchfield Governing Board. I hereby call this meeting to order. The first item on our agenda will be the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could please stand and join us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next will be a moment of silent reflection. Thank you. We will move on to the next item on our agenda, which will be presentations. This will be the proposed expenditure budget presentation done by Executive Director Vaughn.
Madam President, members of the governing board, colleagues and community, thank you for joining me to discuss the district's budget for fiscal year 2024. Today's presentation aligns with the district's strategic plan to increase stakeholder knowledge and understanding of school finance and funding. State statute requires that school districts propose an annual budget by July 5th each year and hold a public hearing and adopt that budget no later than July 15th. First, I will cover some general budget highlights. The district uses fund accounting and adopts budget for many different funds. Each fund has unique revenue sources and allowable uses. The district's largest funds are maintenance and operations, or M&O, which supports daily operation and costs, people, and programs, and unrestricted capital outlay, which supports buildings, improvements, furniture, equipment, technology, and other items that will be used longer than a year. The budget across all funds is relatively stable from last year, increasing by about $400,000. Most of the increased budget is being driven by an increase in budget balance in M&O and unrestricted capital outlay and classroom site funds. M&O and capital outlay resources are available to be used, as I previously mentioned. Classroom site fund is used by the district for certain instructional salaries and benefits. These increases are being largely offset by a decline in budget availability in other federal grants and bond building, where the district holds unspent funds from the previous bond sales. Bond building funds are restricted for use for capital items in the voter-approved spending categories described in the district's bond program. Available resources for the bond program naturally decline as the district utilizes the voter-approved funds, such as finishing the construction of the new White Tanks Learning Center that will be opening with the new school year. Other federal grants is the budget category that contains many of the district's COVID-19 related federal grants. As these grants are spent and the programs come to an end, less of these funds are available. I will now go into more detail.
When she was elementary, every fucking day we heard this all day long. She's practicing.
Misty, you are not on mute.
Arizona School District's M&O budget is set by statutory formula that is regularly updated through the state's budgeting process. The formula is driven in large part by weighted student counts, which considers average daily membership or the number of full-time equivalent students served by the district and the student characteristics such as special education status to determine how much funding will be made available to the district to serve its students. Funding is also made available for transportation, which considers daily route miles driven to transport students to and from school. On this slide, you can see a year-over-year comparison of the budget available in M&O and its various sources. The proposed budget for fiscal year 2024 is based on a slight increase in student enrollment supported by the analysis provided by Applied Economics at the April 25th board meeting and the increase in per pupil funding provided through the state budget. These factors are driving the $2.2 million increase in the revenue control limit from the last revised budget from last year. The revenue control limit is the funding provided from the funding formula I described on the previous slide. It is the ongoing funding generated to support district's students. We'll see in future budget revisions throughout the year that our revenue control limit estimates are updated with changes in student enrollment. The district is also seeing an increase in the value of the district's voter-approved M&O override. This is being driven in large part by the additional per pupil funding passed by the state for this coming year. These increases are being partially offset by the district's anticipation of a smaller M&O carry forward coming into fiscal year 2024 than the district had coming into fiscal year 2023 due to more spending in the M&O fund than revenues received. It's important to note that while M&O overrides and the funding made available through the funding formula are ongoing, the budget balance carried forward is part of the district's rainy day fund. It's only replenished by spending less than the district receives in ongoing funding and is not an ongoing annual revenue source. The district's M&O budget was developed considering guidance provided by the governing board at the April 11th governing board meeting, where the projected budget for fiscal year 2024 was approved, as well as items that the governing board has approved since approving the projected budget. In fact, this proposed budget is simply reflecting that previous governing board direction on the legal budget forms. This slide shows the high-level overview of the M&O budget by functional program, such as general education and special education, and also highlights the budgeted classroom spending percentage of 71.3% spent in the classroom, which considers instruction, student support, instructional support, co-curricular and athletic activities, and the specialized K-3 reading program funding that is provided through the state formula. Looking at the M&O budget by type of spending, you can see that a great majority of the budget is between salaries, benefits, and purchase professional services, which include contracted staffing. This slide shows the M&O budget being proposed compared to the projected budget approved on April 11th. Most of the change is driven by additional one-time revenues approved by the state in the budget for next year. These additional funds will be supporting additional spending that has already been approved by the governing board since the April 11th governing board meeting, as shown on the slide. The new administrative team will be considering additional uses for the remaining funds to potentially include assisting with staying on target with the budget balancing process, projects related to the forthcoming update to the district strategic plan, and the expansion of the Leader in Me program. Our reserves are pacing to be between $1 million less to the target, on target to what was projected with the April budget projections, depending on the clearing of encumbrances and other year-end movement. As a reminder, the Unrestricted Capital Outlay Fund supports construction, remodels of facilities, equipment, textbooks, and other items that will last the district longer than a year. Similar to the M&O Fund, unrestricted capital outlay resources are provided to the district via a statutory formula that considers average daily membership or full-time equivalent students served by the district and a funding amount per student. Unrestricted capital outlay considers a prior year student count when determining funding, unlike M&O, which considers current year membership. Here you can see a year-over-year comparison of the unrestricted capital outlay limit. Most of the increase in the fund is being caused by increased fund balance coming into fiscal year 2024 compared to what was brought into fiscal year 2023. This is showing that we expended $2 million less than capital revenue we brought in for fiscal year 2023. This is actually a positive position to be in because we have significant capital spending that was approved in fiscal year 2023 that will be carrying over into fiscal year 2024, including the build out of portable classrooms at Verado Elementary and Soda, and the district's investment in the science adoption. It's also important to note that a significant amount of our capital support comes from Prop 123 funding, as you can see on the slide. This funding is set to expire after June 30th, 2025. Litchfield is in a positive position to weather that particular fiscal cliff due to the district's living within its means from a capital perspective. The unrestricted capital outlay budget is split fairly evenly between furniture, equipment, vehicles, textbooks, library books, and instructional materials. The remainder of the budget will be available for facility improvements and replacements. The Classroom Site Fund was originally created due to a voter-approved sales tax for education in the early 2000s. After 20 years as a voter-approved initiative, the state legislature took action to continue the Classroom Site Fund as opposed to let it expire. The revenue districts receive from the Classroom Site Fund is driven by sales taxes the state collects related to the Classroom Site Fund, as well as certain state land trust transactions. Each year, the Joint Legislative Budget Committee publishes per student allocations for the Classroom Site Fund. Districts receive Classroom Site Fund on prior year student counts, similar to unrestricted capital outlay. You can see the district is allocated to receive approximately $8.8 million in Classroom Site Fund revenues for fiscal year 2024 and is carrying forward approximately $4.5 million from prior years. The district targets spending close to all revenues received in the Classroom Site Fund and maintaining approximately a half-year balance. And we do this because we're working to strike a balance of supporting staff as much as we possibly can in a financially sustainable way, while also protecting them from potentially facing pay cuts in the future due to volatility in state sales taxes. This is significantly important due to the structural significance of the Classroom Site Fund and the district's compensation for instructional staff. Eligible employees are approved to receive as much as $12,000 from the Classroom Site Fund, or 18% of our projected average teacher compensation for fiscal year 2024. This slide shows the specific ways the district utilizes the Classroom Site Fund for instructional salaries and benefits, including base pay increases, performance pay for classroom teachers, and instructional aides for schools depending on site enrollment. The district has a number of other funds that are included in the budget. I've highlighted a couple on the slide along with the district's plans for fiscal year 2024. The district's M&O, unrestricted capital outlay, and adjacent ways budgets discussed tonight are funded in part by local property taxes. The state funding formula for education includes a qualifying tax rate, which sets a consistent starting point for the expected community support of school districts across the state. From that starting point, the levy, or total dollar amount expected to be collected in taxes from the primary tax rate, is adjusted based on certain local factors. Secondary tax rates are set to support voter-approved initiatives such as the district's M&O override and bond program. These two amounts, along with the community's assessed valuation, or the value of the taxable property in the district, set the tax rate. In total, the district's combined tax rate is expected to decline as shown on this slide. For tax purposes, the state limits the increase individual homeowners experience in their valuation to 5% a year. Based on the capped increase in valuation and the decline in tax rate, we estimate an average individual taxpayer will see a 4% reduction in their property taxes from the district in the coming year. At this point, I'm available to answer any questions you might have on the district's budget for fiscal year 2024.
Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Honak. Did you have any questions or comments? No. Okay, Mr. Owens.
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Moran, did you have any questions or comments?
You know I do. Okay, so Executive Director Vaughn, I have a few questions, so I will try to make this as succinct and easy as possible. My first question has to do with our contracted positions that we recently approved as a board. So I know we're hoping to fill some of our staff shortages next year with contracted positions. Explain to me how we are counting those positions in the, what I would call like standard M&O budget and in the professional services line, and that we're not double dipping, or how that's being allocated between those two. Can you give me more information on that?
Sure. So during our budgeting process this past year, we made some changes in prior ways we estimate expenditures moving forward to try to have a more accurate representation of where we think the district would end up after that budgeting process. And so historically, what the district had been doing was starting each budgeting process with the assumption that all vacant positions would be filled. As opposed to doing that in this past budget cycle that's informed the budget we're talking about tonight, what we did was we assumed that all vacancies would continue as they had in the prior year. So as opposed to starting with last year's expenses plus all of the salary savings from vacant positions, we started with just last year's expenses. And so that should allow us to make sure that we're not double counting at least near as much as the district had in the past. Now, I will say that's not to say that I don't think we were conservative in our budgeting this past year. So as we talked about new components to the budget, new positions or new additions, the costs that we presented were the full year cost, assuming that those positions would be filled the entire year. And the reason we did that was to promote transparency. We wanted to be able to have a realistic conversation around what that total cost could potentially be with the additional spending. But as we all know, there are vacancies throughout the year, and the costs of those items will probably be at least a little bit less than what had been presented and approved. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that does. Thank you. So basically, we're still being conservative, but not as conservative. We're going to be somewhere in the middle between not counting any of them that we anticipate to be contracted versus counting all of them. We should fall somewhere in between.
Yeah, I still think we'll end up in a slightly better position than projected potentially, but nowhere near the difference between projected and actual that we had been seeing in the past.
Okay, excellent. I have one more question on the M&O portion, and this question just came to me because I realized I don't think I have all the information behind this. So the one-time state aid of 2.6 million, I know part of that, I believe, was maybe for the summer school. Part of that might be for what replaced this Plus Up grant, but tell me what's making up that 2.6 million.
So that's a good question. The two grants that you mentioned are actually entirely separate revenues from that 2.6 million.
Oh, okay.
The 2.6 million is something that was added in this last state budget cycle after we had already gone through our projected budget work, where the state had found that they had some surplus resources, and the legislature had approved providing, I believe it was 300 million to all districts statewide. And so the 2.6 million is Litchfield's allocation of that 300 million that was shared amongst all the districts.
Okay, and so that is that pandemic related, or that's just literally surplus that they allocated out?
My understanding is that's just surplus that they allocated out.
And are there any restrictions on those monies? Does it have to be M&O or?
It has to be either M&O or capital.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay. I will move on. I have a question on the DAA budget carryover increase of 2 million. I know you highlighted this during your presentation, but can you explain to me again what we plan to do with that 2 million and how that kind of came to be?
Sure. So we have some pretty substantial capital projects that the governing board approved during fiscal year 2023, but due to the timing of construction or that approval, the actual spending of those resources didn't happen in fiscal year 2023. The two largest examples are the portable classroom additions at Verado Elementary and Belen Soto, as well as the purchases for the science curriculum adoption. The two of those combined are more than the $2 million, but the genesis of that $2 million is that we brought in more capital revenue than we spent. But in essence, that $2 million is already spent because those projects are continuing into FY24, and the funds should be spent in FY24 for those purposes.
Okay, so part of your process when you're determining and recommending to the board, for example, the portables or where the funding for the science curriculum is coming from, is you're looking at the DAA and you're seeing, okay, what have we already spent? What are we going to have available to spend? So even though we're carrying forward an additional 2 million, you know that 2 million is going to be spent. It's not, we're not really, this is not increasing the rainy day fund. This is just carrying it forward to the next year where we plan to utilize those funds.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. My next question is about the classroom site funds. So tell me more about the classroom site fund. So when I look at slide, I think it's slide 16, I see, you know, the allocation for the year is 8.8 million, and we have this budget carry forward of 4.5 million. So to your point, as you mentioned in the presentation, we expect to carry forward half a year of classroom site funds in order to better balance any fluctuations in these funds that are coming. So can you tell me a little bit more about where we think this is going? You know, my thought behind this is, you know, we use these funds as you allocate here, as you indicate here, that we use this primarily for certified instructor pay. We have kind of 3 buckets that comes out of, and then we utilize it for instructional assistance. As the board is aware, we approved additional instructional assistance during the pandemic using ESSER dollars that we're going to need to fund from somewhere else. Potentially, we're going to not have money to be able to do that. So I want to talk about possibilities for classroom site funds, and if there's room to maybe reallocate or change the way we utilize these funds. Tell me more, Executive Director Vaughn.
Sure. So I'm glad to hear you use the term reallocate, because if we were to want to utilize the classroom site fund in that way, that's what we would need to be doing. Because this is the budget presentation and not the year-end annual financial report presentation, what I don't have in the presentation is expenditure estimates for the current year. But let me share that with you just for context of this conversation. So in fiscal year 2023, we're on track to spend $7.9 million from the classroom site fund, and should receive 8.3 million. So we really do target spending all the revenue that we bring in from the classroom site fund. The reason we don't get closer is because when we set the classroom site fund to pay dollar amounts for the year, we do it as an estimate and prior to the state actually setting those amounts. And so some years the classroom site fund amount is higher than we estimated. Some years it's lower. And then as the classroom site fund per pupil allocation increases to try to keep that half a year's balance steady, you have to potentially not spend all of the money, but close to the money. So when we talk about the concept of adding additional positions or additional ongoing salary costs to the classroom site fund, That would be challenging to do from a ongoing or sustainable perspective, because we already spend just about all the revenue that we bring in from the classroom site fund. So if we were wanting to do that, what that would ultimately look like is passing on a pay cut to certified employees to make room for moving additional aides here. As a reminder, certified employees are eligible to up to $12,000 of compensation from these funds, and it makes up about 18% of our expected average teacher compensation for this next year. So cutting that portion of their compensation could potentially be significant. The other reason we hold such a large balance is because this is primarily driven by state sales tax, and sales tax can be very volatile. The Joint Legislative Budget Committee is a part of the state government that works to provide budget projections and budget information on the state, including revenues like sales tax. Very similar to the type of work I try to do for our team. And they recently published their report for June, and sales taxes are not on track to be where they should be, not just for the classroom site fund, but in general. And so when the state sets what the per pupil amount for the classroom site fund is, they do it based on their estimates of where sales tax will be for the current year, but also the next year. And so if those sales tax projections are not hit, then our revenue to the classroom site fund could decline in the future year. And in fact, if they don't collect enough sales tax revenue, they could even decline our revenue for the year we're planning for. And so to try to avoid and protect our employees from any sort of turbulence in that significant portion of their pay, we hold a significant reserve there. But I will say we do reevaluate it every year. And as a reminder, we did increase the payouts from the classroom site fund by $200 coming into fiscal year 2024.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of points. Well, one point and then one item maybe for future discussion. My first point is that I in no way, shape, or form am insinuating we would cut teacher pay. So rest assured about that. But what I would like us to consider, so my original thought was utilizing more of these funds, understanding why we have such a significant balance that we're carrying forward, because it seems to me in a way we're saying, you know, if my annual salary is $50,000, that I have an emergency fund of $25,000, you know, because you're taking, you know, half of that kind of as your, if something goes terribly wrong type thing. So I feel like this is on the conservative side. So I'd like to free up as much as possible. But in hearing this conversation today, what I think really I don't like about this is that we are using a volatile funding source to pay our teachers. And teacher pay is, in my opinion, not negotiable. I mean, they go into the year expecting a certain amount. Usually that's based on what the board has approved, and we want to fulfill that. We want to make sure that our teachers have confidence in what they're making. And so when we have these conversations and we're funding their pay from something that might go down, that does not provide assurance to me. So have we ever thought about, or should we think about, doing a reallocation? So from M&O, utilizing that, let's say $12,000, and then using the classroom site funds for our nice to haves, but not have to haves. We have to have classroom teachers, so that's not really, again, not negotiable. But should we think about changing what we're using classroom site funds for so that we can be more agile for any potential fluctuations, and we can react to those better without even mentioning a cut in teacher pay?
You certainly could. There are some restrictions that classroom site fund has to be used to a certain extent on certified compensation. So the full ability to do that would be somewhat restricted, but it is something we could explore in future budget cycles.
Yeah, I'd like us to at least consider that. Some of the new positions that we added due to the ESSER funds, although I believe we're going to find that we want to continue those. Again, those might be more nice to haves. And so, yeah, I just don't want us to always go into things saying this is how it's been done. And so that's how it needs to be done. So just something to think about there. My last question is overall, based on, we had a conversation in January projecting out where our reserves, our rainy day fund would be in future years. Knowing now where this initial budget is falling into place for fiscal year 24, how do you think that impacts our reserve projections?
So in preparing the 2024 proposed budget, I did do a quick review of where I now think that the reserves will end up. And I think our projections were fairly good. I do think our reserves may actually end up slightly less than what we projected in during the proposed or the projected budget process, but it's still a pretty big range right now, just depending on how encumbrances clear through the end of the year and other year-end kind of activity. But I think we'll be within a 700,000, $1 million of where we had talked about before.
Okay, excellent. No more questions. Thank you so much for all the information.
Ms. Clymer, did you have questions or comments?
No additional questions. I just had the one, but it was covered in the last conversation. Thank you.
Perfect. I also have no questions. I feel like Kim asked all the questions and you covered everything really well. And just a reminder to people that are watching, we have been talking about this budget for a long time now. So none of this is really new stuff. And even though there's extra money that we're getting from the state that we weren't necessarily expecting to have, we also have been planning to spend that since that came out. We've added the new things. So I want people to know, because I know we get sometimes people are like, you are going to approve this budget and you only talk about it for like 30 minutes, but we have spent hours talking about this budget and our staff has spent even more hours talking about this budget. So when we move forward with this, I just want to make sure people know that we have put in a lot of time and energy and effort into making sure that this is the best budget that we can come up with. But thank you so much for putting this together.
Thank you.
We have no public comment speaking, so we are going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which will be the consent agenda. I will go through and see if anyone has any questions or things they would like to pull off of consent. Mr. Honak? Mr. Owens?
I don't need to pull anything off, but I do have questions. Let me find it. I'm sorry. I believe it's, yes, M.
M?
Yeah, just questions on M.
Okay, perfect.
As in, yeah.
Ms. Moran, did you have any questions or anything you wanted to pull off?
I do not want to pull anything off. I have a comment on 5D and a question on 5M.
Okay, Ms. Clymer, any questions or anything you want to pull off?
No, nothing I want to pull off. Thank you.
Okay, so we will start with Ms. Moran's comment on 5D.
Okay, 5D is the approval of the revised employee handbook for 23-24. This document to me is very legalese. It's basically a way that we highlight to our employees the policies that they should be paying attention to that apply to them specifically. I would love to see this handbook updated. Not necessarily the policy piece, that'll be updated as the policies get updated, but even the introductory portion is very outdated for what I think we might want this to accomplish. I'm kind of comparing it in my mind to the student handbook as well. So if we could put on I don't even think we need to have it as agenda item. If we could just have HR potentially take a look at the employee handbook, maybe before it's put out next year, the next year's version. And maybe do some just, look and feel updates to that. I would appreciate that personally.
I see her writing that down. She's shaking her head. Thank you. And then we will comment on item 5M. So I'll start with Mr. Owens.
Sorry, thanks. I just more for informational purposes. The director for teaching and learning, the new position they're hiring for, that position reports to the executive director of programs and instructions, right? Can you remind me who that is? Because all the titles are new and stuff. Okay. Okay. Is there a way to get a brief description of that job position and their duties and responsibilities? Just real quick,
Hi,
Hi.
Board Member Owens. So we just wanted to restate, so the Director of Teaching and Learning reports to the Executive Director of Programs and Instruction. We just want to say that so everybody could hear that. And then a brief description of the position. If you remember, we retitled this director position. It's the Director of Curriculum. So in short, kind of quick summary, it is responsible for leading the curriculum and the professional development and those types of things for the district. And maybe Dr. Doozy could maybe add a little bit more to that.
Yes, so one of the greatest changes in the job description for the Director of Teaching and Learning was the aspect of behavior. So as far as interventions and directing teachers of how to respond to classroom management, as well as those tier 1 behavior interventions, and then those kids that might need more tier 2, tier 3 interventions. So that is a new roles and responsibilities for that particular position, which is the reason why we changed it from Director of Curriculum and Instruction to Director of Teaching and Learning, because it encompassed not just the curriculum and the instruction habits of the classroom, but the actual critical attributes that teachers need to have to respond to their teaching, as well as ensuring kids are learning.
Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Ms. Moran, your questions on this item?
Yes, my question. I was really encouraged to see the number of new hires that we have on this list for our certified staff, but I'm curious about where we currently stand with certified staff openings, unfilled positions.
Hello, Board Member Moran. This is Director Reichs. So we have made headway. We currently have 30 open certified positions. 6 of those are contracted guest teachers.
Excellent. Thank you for the update.
If there's no other questions or comments, I will take a motion to approve the consent.
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
Having a first and a second, I'll call for the vote. Mr. Honak,
Aye.
Mr. Owens,
Yay.
Ms. Moran,
Yay.
Ms. Clymer.
Yay.
I'm also a yay. Motion passes. Okay, we are going to move on to item 6, which is the approval of the proposed expenditure budget. This will again be by Executive Director Vaughn.
Madam President, members of the governing board, I will also stand for questions if there are any more questions on the proposed budget, but would otherwise ask if you would consider approving the proposed budget, which we will be revisiting if approved to be proposed July 5th for adoption.
Okay. Mr. Honak, did you have any more questions or comments on this item? Mr. Owens,
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Moran,
No additional questions.
Ms. Clymer,
No, and I will move to approve the proposed expenditure budget as presented.
I will second.
having a first and a second, I'll call for the vote. Mr. Honak,
Yay.
Mr. Owens,
Yay.
Ms. Moran,
Yay.
Ms. Clymer.
Yay.
I'm also a yay, so motion passes. Mr. Vaughn, can you please just share for the public? So we've approved this today, I guess it's not nighttime, today, and then it's going to be posted. What's the steps? Can you explain this for people that are curious?
Sure. So it'll be posted on our website and on ADE's website, along with a meeting notification that just further notifying folks that we will be meeting on July 5th to consider actually adopting the budget for fiscal year 2024. So the action, I just about said tonight, but the action today is simply saying, yes, we are proposing this budget. And then we have to do that 10 days prior to holding a public hearing and allowing our community again to come ask us questions and speak on the budget, to which point then we would potentially have a vote to actually adopt the budget for 2024.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that. So people go look at it and then you send your questions or comments to Executive Director Vaughn or us, who will send you to Director Vaughn. And we will be then meeting again on the 5th to officially approve this, hopefully. So we will move on to the next item, which is our first reading of Governing Board Policy Revision DJE bidding purchasing procedures. This will also be by Executive Director Vaughn. This is like the Executive Director Vaughn show today.
Isn't it always? Anyhow, for the most part, this revision is simply to align the policy with change in titles with the new org chart. So this is changing Executive Director of Finance to Chief Financial Officer.
Does anyone have any questions? Mr. Honak,
No questions.
Mr. Owens,
I have no questions.
Ms. Moran?
I do not have a question on this policy. However, I do have a request for a future board agenda item. I think in reviewing this policy, it brought back to mind something that the previous administration had discussed at one point, and I think it would be prudent for us as a board to discuss this again and determine a timeline for this, which would be a full policy audit of our board policies. I'm not sure when the last time we did that, but it definitely was more than 5 years ago. I think it would be important for compliance to look at not only our internal items such as titles, but also look at the external items such as legislature and things like that that would impact our policies. It seems like we could be missing something there, and I think this would be a great opportunity to make sure that everything is back in line with this changeover in a district administration.
They are writing that down. I have it on the list. Ms. Clymer, did you have any questions or comments?
No, I don't have any, but to the point that Ms. Moran just made, yes, this was actually, this has been on a list of activities in the prior administration. So I'd like to see it be finished as well. And for us, for the administration internally to review it, but us as a board to just make sure that that review has been done and probably schedule this moving forward to make sure we don't let too many years go in between when this doesn't happen. So agreed.
Thank you. I also have no questions. I will get myself to change your title in my head going forward, starting in July when we meet on the 5th. But this is just for information today. So if there's nothing else on this item, we are going to move on to the last item on the agenda.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
I will second.
Having a first and a second, I will call for the vote. Mr. Honak,
Yay.
Mr. Owens,
Yay.
Ms. Moran,
Yay.
Ms. Clymer.
Yay.
I am also a yay, and I am so excited. We are done before 12 o'clock.